Welcome back to the workshop, everybody. So glad you could be with me here today. Walter at the workbench. So we were just highlighting the topic of wood shrinkage the other day, and I thought I'd get into it and do the whole thing for you. So, how did our ancestors deal with working green wood, or at least working wood that was not forced dry? All right. In order to get to that point, we need to start with a tiny little seed. Or, just remember, an acorn was once a nut, like me. I mean, you know what I mean. The tree seed falls in the ground, it sprouts, and it begins to grow. If the tree has no competition, it will grow rapidly. So the first few years of growth is quick. But as the forest around it develops, there might be trees that grew faster, different species, poplar, pine, and here you have cherry. Or if you think about that acorn, if it was a white oak acorn, that's going to grow slower. Beech grows slower. So what you end up with is every year the tree adds on growth, more wood. Outside is the bark, the different layers underneath the bark, and then the sapwood. I've removed the sapwood because I was trained it's a defect. And then every year, closer to the center of the tree, it becomes heartwood. All right? Now, in the dead center of the tree is something called the pith. P-I-T-H. Pith. The wood that surrounds the pith is the most unstable wood in the tree. I know a lot of you have seen things made where the bandsaw has gone right through the center of a walnut tree, leaving those open squiggles right through the pith. And I know you've seen people do turnings with the pith running right through. No, I'm sorry. The pith is the most unstable wood in the tree, and it should be discarded. That's, when we're talking about cabinetry and furniture, that's a fact. Now, once you remove the pith, so I have removed it from this side. There's no little pin knots, there's no little center hole going up, none of that. That's all gone. And the sapwood out here is gone. But you can still tell a lot about this tree and how it grew. If you notice, and I'm not sure how much you'll be able to see, it grew fast in the beginning, some pretty wide growth rings. Then for about probably 20, 30 years, it grew slower and more evenly. So I'm thinking what happened was, back over here, remember I took off about an inch or two of the pith over here. The other trees came in around it, and it slowed the growth down. There also might have been a time, a few decades of less rainfall, less sunlight, okay? All comes into play. And then I would suspect somewhere out here there was a harvest, and they took many of the trees away, and then it grew fast, and then it slowed down somewhat, okay? So you can tell a lot about how a tree grows, and I suspect this has a lot to do with rain. Also, a lot of heavy rain, the tree grows fast. Now, back to the topic, shrinkage. How much is this wood going to shrink? Well, if it was right from the tree as we cut it off the stump and felled it and sawed it out, it would be what we call green. Okay? I did some calculations, and of the woods that I have here, cherry, maple, walnut, ash, tulip poplar, red and white oak, of those predominant woods that I have in this pack, the average shrinkage, and I use an average only because I'm trying to think up ways of using this wood, tells me that if this board is 3/8 of an inch thick when I finish planing it, it's a 1/16 over right now, and I go to use it right away, it is going to shrink, by the time it's stable, a 32nd of an inch. Now think about that. Does not sound like much, okay? However, remember we talked about how our fingers, if we haven't calloused them all over, can detect 1/1000th of an inch, down to 1/1000th of an inch. Okay? So think about that too. 1/1000th of an inch is thinner than the human hair. All right? So you can feel that. A 32nd of an inch, believe it or not, I got the math here somewhere. 32nd of an inch is 32.25 thousandths of an inch. So if this board would be planed to 3/4, it would shrink a 1/16 in width, which would be a 1/16 of an inch and 64.5 thousandths of an inch. That's, when it comes to woodworking joinery, that's a mile, okay? That's a lot of shrinkage. So how did they make furniture before the advent of kiln-dried or force-dried lumber, or even air-dried lumber? How did they work? How did they work straight from green wood? Well, before we go there, let's just get one more part of shrinkage clarified. When I was talking about shrinkage, it was tangentially, because this is a quarter sawn board, okay? It's going to shrink less than that, about half in this direction. And I had said, good quality flooring is almost always quarter sawn for two reasons. One, the shrinkage is minimal. And two, the quartered face takes more impact. All right? Sometimes it's not much, but it does take more impact. Now, so tangentially is sort of like if you took and you stretched a rubber band around a tree and let it go. The outside of the tree wants to shrink down quickly, whereas radially goes from the center of the tree to the sapwood. And that's going to shrink a lot less, all right? And in longitude, or the long way, it shrinks negligibly. It's really a microscopic type thing. So how did they put things together? So they wouldn't see the joints. They hid them. That's right. They hid the joints. Joints like dovetails. That's a non-issue. Why? Because the dovetail, all the wood is moving in the same direction. The worst case scenario on dovetail joints is that the tailboard will shrink a little bit more and the pins will be a little proud. That's the worst case. No big deal. And how they hid that in drawer construction is they did the half-blind dovetails where the front hides the dovetails. Because actually dovetails were considered ugly. They were considered a fastening method. Nobody wanted to see them. Same with mortise and tenon. Mortise and tenon is a construction joint. Nobody wanted to see them. So how do we handle that? Well, it's simple. It's called shoulders. You cut a shoulder on every joint that's going to be butted up against something else so that as it shrinks, the shoulder hides it. So for instance, a table leg with an apron or a bedpost with a rail, doesn't matter. Anywhere where you have to put a tenon into a mortise, you would create shoulders here and here. And when this was put into a blind mortise, not a through mortise, some people call them a housed mortise, but basically a mortise that isn't through, doesn't go all the way through. Any shrinkage is hidden. It's all hidden. You'll never know. You put 2 pegs in there and you fit it tight, and then you draw bore the pegs, which means you offset the pegs before you pound them together. Once you put together, it's together permanently and it will never come apart. All right? And if you don't want to see the pins, you do that from the inside and you don't blow out through the other side. It's amazing. You look at old furniture, they hid everything. Let's say you need to build a bookcase or you need to put a shelf in someplace. You could use either a housing joint, or we call it a dado. This is the vertical, this is the shelf, and you put a little shoulder. It only needs to be about 2 or 3 times as much as your shrinkage to hide the shrinkage. And those 2, there are ways to put just part of those through, like just 1-inch squares, and then wedge them from the outside. So you're pulling the whole thing together if other parts of the construction isn't holding it in place. So they hid everything. That's how they did it. It's all a secret. So, I hope that helped explain shrinkage, or as it's known, expansion and contraction in wood, and how to work with wood, knowing right from the get-go, not the gecko, you know, the little green guy, not him, the get-go, that it's going to shrink, and you need to conceal that shrinkage, and you need some mechanical way of holding it all together. Because remember, a couple hundred years ago, there was no special glue. That's some beautiful lumber. Look at that. Ain't that pretty? That's pretty. And smooth as silk. There's no sandpaper. So really, I'm dying to figure out exactly what I'm going to do with all this wood, because once I do that, we'll show you the projects. But until then, I want to thank you for stopping by and visiting with me. I hope you made it all the way through the video. If you did, I give you a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, I welcome you to subscribe if you like. And any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section. But as always, I hope you found something useful, helpful, or entertaining. And if you did, great. And don't forget, go out to your shop, make some shavings. Walter out.